Good evening, my fellow Americans. It is the 26th of February, and this is A Quiet Rage. I do apologize, it's been a while since I've done a regular episode. Had family in town, had some things going on. But we're back at it. Now, you might be expecting that my first episode back after the State of the Union, that the State of the Union would be my topic. And there's plenty that I could talk about. But I want to talk about something that more immediate, the State of the Union, don't get me wrong, has immediate effect for a lot of people. But I want to talk about a more specific topic, and that is, in particular, the fact that it is now illegal to be a trans person in the state of Kansas. The state of Kansas is now officially a fascist state. H sub, House substitute for SB 244, makes it illegal for a trans person to have on their driver's license as their sex or as their gender anything other than what they were assigned at birth. You may have seen that letters were sent out. I'll put it right up here so you can see it. Actually, I'll just put it right over my face so you can read it real well. I want to draw particular attention to the fact that these letters were sent on February the 23rd, 2026. You can see it right there at the top under the letterhead. And the law takes effect February 26th. That's today. So trans people in Kansas with an ID that doesn't indicate their gender assigned at birth had 3 days by this official notice. 3 days to get a new ID. And if they don't, they are subject to fines. Now, this might not seem like a big deal to us cisgender folk. You just got to get a new ID. What's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal. I can assure you it's a big deal to trans people who have to fight every day to be recognized for who they truly are. I've said it before. There's exactly one person in this world that gets to tell you who you are. It's you. Nobody else gets to dictate to you who you are. This is state-sponsored fascism. This is erasing people's identities, people's feeling of knowledge of who they are as people, saying, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. And it's illegal, by the way. It's illegal to have a license in the state of Kansas as of midnight tonight. Probably by the time you're viewing this video, it is illegal to have a driver's license that doesn't indicate the gender that you were assigned at birth. And MAGA, if you're going to try and tell me that, well, you should just comply with the law, they had plenty of notice. They should have been paying attention. This law, after all, it was first voted on February 18th. Or no, sorry, even further back than that. Sorry. January 28th. So a month ago. This was first voted on. And it was vetoed by the governor, and then the supermajority, the Republican supermajority in the Kansas state legislature overrode the veto and pushed it through kind of a shady deal. Anyway, it's legal. Kansas can do it. $1,000 in fine for essentially what this really is a bathroom bill. It's another version of a bathroom bill. Now, back to the notification, right? Trans people in Kansas should have known that this was coming. There should be no reason, you MAGA folks might say, no reason at all why a trans person in, or as you people love to say, a trans person, trans people. Just, there's a guy at work that keeps doing that. Anyway. You, MAGA, you might be tempted to say, these trans people in Kansas had plenty of notice. They should have known that this was coming. I'm just curious. Do you have your real ID? Does everyone in your house have one that's supposed to? Do you perhaps know people that don't have one yet? Because I do. And by the way, a real ID is mandated just to shut you down right now from saying they've had plenty of time, they could have done this. The Real ID Act of 2005. There are Americans who still don't have a real ID. The Real ID Act of 2005 was in response to the September 11th attacks. It goes back that far. Originally, it was intended to take effect in 2008, so you had 3 years originally, but there were numerous states that fought it in different ways. Eventually, in 2012, states began to comply. After numerous extensions, this is all going to be linked and you can read this for yourself. After numerous extensions by 2020, all states were certified, and by 2024, all territories were certified. Enforcement based on the identification documents began on May the 7th, 2025, and is scheduled to be implemented in phases until complete enforcement begins. Wait for it. On May the 5th, 2027. This law will be 22 years old when we as a country fully are enforcing compliance. And trans people in Kansas were given 3 days by official notice, by letters sent to them, which, by the way, a little creepy, don't you think? Just, hey, by the way, here's official mail from the state of Kansas. We know that you're trans, and we don't like it, and we want you to change. So that's fun. As I was saying, bathroom ban. This is a version of a bathroom ban, and I've said this before. I'm not the only one that said it. Bathroom bans have nothing whatsoever to do with protecting girls and women. Nothing. Zero. You might say that that's what you want, but you're full of shit. That's not really what you want. And here's how I know. For one thing, sexual assaults on women and girls don't always happen in bathrooms. And they almost never happen as a result. The aggressor is almost never a trans person. It's almost always a cis het dude like me, guy that looks like this, and it's probably somebody that they know. A large majority of sexual assault and rape victims are assaulted and raped by people that they already know. And what the asinine thought that a potential sexual deviant, a potential sexual criminal is going to be deterred by an ID or a sign on a door is just, it's, as I said, asinine. It's childish. We all know it's not true. I've said this many times before. The way I know that you don't take the protection of women and girls seriously if bathroom bills are your only the only thing you ever talk about. The number of rape kits untested in this country is, if you knew the numbers, it would knock your socks off. But you have nothing to say about that. We still have a rape culture in this country where we are more likely to believe the attackers who say, I don't even know who that is. I never touched her. We don't believe the victims when they tell us. Oftentimes, numerous people, with famous people like, oh, I don't know, our president, the president of these United States, President Donald Trump, credibly accused by multiple women over decades of rape and sexual assault, affirmed by a court of law to have raped E. Jean Carroll. People still don't believe that. He's in the Epstein files hundreds of thousands of times. He brags on, I'm okay. It's not about him. It's about the culture of this country. We don't believe victims. As a society, we don't believe victims. Or we try and question them. What were you wearing? Are you sure you weren't giving off the wrong signals? Are you sure you didn't invite this upon yourself? If you've ever said that, you should be ashamed of yourself. And you don't actually care about protecting women and girls. You don't care. You think it's their problem. You think it's their responsibility to protect themselves. If you're still in 2026, if you're still laughing at sexist jokes, you don't care about women and girls. If in 2026 you are not pushing for better funding and better oversight of women's sports, you don't actually care about, if the only thing you want to do is keep trans people out, trans women out of women's sports, you don't actually give a shit about the women and girls that are competing. You don't. The cisgender women and girls. You don't actually care about them. You just think it's icky. You just think it's kind of gross that there's a trans person might be in there, in the same locker room, in the same pool, in the same competition. You are transphobic. Plain and simple. Because if you actually cared, you would believe the victims of coaches. The U.S. gymnastics team coach, for example, who for years was assaulting young women in the United States Olympic gymnastics program. Larry Nassar. If you've ever said, well, those girls were just out to burn a coach that didn't like them, you don't actually care about women and girls in sports. You don't actually care about their safety. You just think it's icky that there are trans people out there. And you need to examine that about yourself. But you won't. So I don't know. So not only did the state of Kansas give trans people 3 days of official notice that they had to get this new ID, they didn't even, I'll post a link to an article in The Guardian which talks about at least one trans person who went to the DMV to try and comply, and when he got there, the people working at the DMV had no idea what he was talking about. had to call a supervisor. So not only did the state of Kansas not give adequate notice or grace period to trans people to comply with this new law, they didn't even properly inform or train their DMV workers. There wasn't a memo, apparently, that they could, to which these people could refer. There was no training, no notice, nothing. So apparently, the state of Kansas doesn't actually expect trans people to comply with this. They expect people to break this law, apparently. If they didn't bother to train DMV workers on how to properly take care of this, to even expect it, to know that these people are coming in. And by the way, it's not as those 3 days, everybody else in Kansas that's got business at the DMV is still going to go on those days. It's not as though those 3 days were set aside. Okay, only trans people who need to get their IDs fixed can go to the DMV on these 3 days so that we can just get it taken care of and nobody else can get in the way. There's not going to be long lines. No, none of that. Not a fucking thing was done by the state of Kansas to actually do this the right way. Nothing. Because it's fascism. It's bigotry. It is legislative bigotry. That's all it is. Okay. It's a quiet rage, right? Calm down. Anyway. So, what can we do? I'm guessing most people that are going to be watching this video don't live in the state of Kansas. So it's not as though you can write your state representatives and state senators. If you do live in Kansas, please write it's a Republican supermajority, so there may not be a whole lot you can do right now. Writing and calling them is probably not going to do a whole lot. In the midterm elections, however, if you've got, I don't know what the Kansas state legislature's turnover times are, but I would recommend, if you live in the state of Kansas, vote blue no matter who, because the odds of a Democrat, the odds, look, Gavin Newsom is out there being a shithead to trans people, so it's not, the odds are a Democrat is much less likely to vote for trash legislation like this. So, if you live in Kansas, vote blue in November. If you don't live in Kansas, I recommend, and this will be linked in the description. I recommend maybe donating a couple of bucks to the ACLU of Kansas. They've already said they're going to fight this. They intend to challenge this law in court, and I certainly hope they do. I think there's a number of ways that this can be fought. There's privacy, for one thing. Making a trans person, every time they show their ID, making a trans person out themselves every time they show an ID, that feels to me like it's an invasion of privacy. And I thought of this too. Like, when you fill out the form for an ID, they just ask you your height, your weight, eye color, sex, etc. They don't check. You don't stand up against the wall and they don't measure to see how actually tall you are. Nor are they checking your chromosomes to see what your actual gender is. So there's a freedom of speech, perhaps, angle. I don't know. But the whole thing just, again, it's legislative bigotry. And I I hope this case sees a courtroom soon, because it's garbage. It's absolute garbage, and I would be embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that Kansas is a part of the union at this point, doing shit like that. And if I lived in Kansas, I would be thoroughly embarrassed to tell people I'm from that state that engages in legislative bigotry like that. So, if you've got a couple of bucks and you can donate to the ACLU of Kansas, I highly recommend that. Also, GLAD is another organization. I'll link these all in the description. GLAD is another organization that helps people that are LGBTQ plus, provides resources and such for those people. Legal resources, getting emancipation resources, etc. If you need to leave a family situation that's dangerous for you as an LGBTQ plus person, GLAD is an organization that helps with that. So if you've got a couple of bucks and you can donate, then definitely do that. And I humbly ask, maybe share this video with somebody and encourage them as well to donate. Spread the word. Because it just... This is the MAGA agenda. This is Project 2025. We told people that it was coming, and many didn't want to believe us, but here it is. Anyway. And again, as I say every episode, what else? Another thing that we can and should do is gather with like-minded folks. Find other Democrats, find other liberals, find other lefties, and gather. I had the distinct pleasure watching the Democratic rebuttal by my Governor Abigail Spanberger of the Commonwealth of Virginia, give the rebuttal to the State of the Union. And sitting in the little audience there behind Governor Spanberger as she gave her speech is someone who I'm on a first name basis with, because I'm a member of my local Democrats group, my local Democratic organization. So, and that was really cool. That I won't lie. I shouted at the TV, sitting in my living room by myself. I shouted at the TV, "I know her! I know who that is!" And that the odds of that happening for anybody else, probably pretty slim, right? But the point stands that the more you get involved, the more you find people that you know that feel the same way you do, the more you'll recognize, as Democrats, as lefties, as liberals, that there's actually a lot of us. Regardless of where in the world, where in the country you are, there's a lot of us. And in general, there are more of us than there are MAGA. MAGA is a minority. And the more time you spend gathering with other Democrats, the more you'll recognize that is the case. So, find your people and gather. If, like me, you understand that trans people are in fact people that deserve the same basic human rights, the same rights that a cisgendered person like myself enjoys, just getting up every day and walking around, not having to do anything special. If you understand that and you want to protect trans people, as we should be, and be an advocate for trans people, as we should be, and protect everyone from sexual assault, as we should, then keep your powder dry and keep your quiet rage. Good night. my fellow Americans.